I think at that point, like I was starting to think that I was just going to be at the morning news until I got laid off, or that I wasn't going to find something else and I was just going to get stuck there. I had this set of skills. It feels like that Liam Neeson movie. But I have these skills, right? I was pretty good at video. I could photo edit. I could do photography. I could write. And I just started to think, like, what the hell am I going to do now? Because I just didn't want to be at the paper anymore.
Hello and welcome to the Photo Forward podcast, the weekly show where we explore the stories behind some of the greatest photographers and visual storytellers the world over. From their photographic origin stories to finding work-life balance as creative professionals, to how to actually make a living as a photographer, cinematographer, or multimedia creator. We uncover what makes them tick and their shutters click. I'm your host, Ben Brewer. But before we get into today's episode, I want to give a big thanks to everyone who's listening, subscribing, and dropping a rating or review on the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. It means so much to me to really start creating a community around the show. So if you want to hear more inspiring and creative shows like we've been producing, please head over to your podcast app of choice and give Photo Forward a review or a rating to help make this show reach an even larger audience around the world. All right, let's get into the show. What happens when you, the photographer, visual creator, discover that the best laid plans that you've had for your career all of a sudden don't line up with the direction you want your life to go in? You know you want to keep taking photos or shooting video, but the path that seemed so well shaped in front of you seems a hell of a lot murkier. There's a great quote that was popularized by the great Stephen Covey, but coined before that so perfectly exemplifies this. It's incredibly easy to get caught up in an activity trap, in the busyness of life, to work harder and harder at climbing the ladder of success, only to discover it's leaning against the wrong wall. Today's episode, similar to previous episodes of transitioning career paths, is all about that climb and the process of picking up that ladder and moving to a different wall and keeping your creative spirit alive throughout it all. Gerry McCarthy, is a creative director of video campaigns for Stanley Black & Decker, based in Central Connecticut. He oversees video and photo production for the company's main corporate marketing department, handling internal and external comms needs for a wide variety of clients. Previously, Gerry was a multimedia producer for the UConn Foundation, a higher education nonprofit that oversees charitable giving to the University of Connecticut. In that role, he helped tell the story of philanthropy at UConn and created content to better engage alumni. Before jumping ship to the marketing and communications world, Gerry spent 14 years as a newspaper photojournalist. The bulk of that time, almost a decade, was spent on the award-winning photo staff at the Dallas Morning News. There, he covered everything from sports to breaking news, enterprise projects, and feature stories. He also frequently worked as a fill-in photo editor on a variety of news desks. Gerry is a Laredo, Texas native and graduate of the University of Texas at Austin, where he studied to be a reporter. In a past life, he was a music major and wildly nerdy about music theory. In his free time, he scratches that old itch, making up short songs on an iPad, and also, self-described, at failing miserably at teaching himself drums and his son the guitar. Gerry lives in the Hartford area with his wife, a few kids, a handful of cats, and several chickens. When he's not doing laundry, scooping litter, or cleaning the coop, he enjoys artisan baking, mostly sourdough, reading, and wandering the house aimlessly. In today's episode with Gerry McCarthy, he and I dive in on how to manage a career transition from the path of the newspaper photojournalist into the marketing and communications world, why keeping your photography work authentic to your creative calling is so critical, and what lessons for younger photographers he's learned from creating on both sides of the journalism marketing aisle. As always, show notes and links to other episodes of the Photo Forward podcast can be found online at photoforward.media/podcast. All right, time for me to get out of the way and let you guys into today's conversation with photographer and creative director Gerry McCarthy. Gerry McCarthy, welcome to the Photo Forward podcast.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Well, there's a lot of different ways to go in this conversation. I definitely want to get into your time at the Dallas Morning News, as well as your time working in the marketing and communications world, of course. But I guess to start with, as I was researching for this episode, I discovered that you have a degree in music theory. So I have to find out more about that. Tell me a little bit about that.
I have a minor in it, but it's an unofficial minor. Because the way I know I'm like super persnickety about this because I worked so hard on that. It should be a minor, but the way the journalism degree works at UT is you don't get a minor, you get a concentration. So like if you studied mostly, writing, you'd be print concentration. I think there was a design concentration. There was a photo concentration. So I didn't get a true minor, but yeah, I have a minor in music theory. Yep. I guess at one time I've really sort of fallen off a lot over the years. But yeah, probably from age, I don't know, 12 to 19 or 20. I mean, that was my laser focus, was to do something in the music world. And then just at some point, I got lucky with some scholarships and I ended up I was at University of North Texas, which is a great music school, and has a really good music theory program. And I don't know, I just got kind of burnt out, I guess. And that's when I switched to, I had a lot of childhood friends that had ended up at UT. And so I originally tried to get in the music program there, but they were much more performance focused. And I just, at that point in my college, I had put a lot more energy into sort of theory and composition and not as much into practicing. I didn't practice very much at all. So I totally failed my audition. And but I ended up at UT and I switched to journalism because I'd always done writing and, high school and stuff. And that's how I ended up there. But I have an app on my iPad called Chord Gadget. And that's like as much as I sort of stretch my little musical muscles. And when I turned 40, I bought myself an electronic drum set that I am doing a really bad job of teaching myself how to play.
Exactly. Well, multifaceted.
I guess I get bored super fast with stuff. It's
fair.
It's probably like a little bit of like a residual ADHD thing or something.
Well, so getting into your studies at UT, you said you were a journalism major, so in print journalism. So it's a little bit rare to see the sort of print journalist turned photojournalist. So tell me a little bit about your studies and what made you kind of transition more into the visual storytelling world.
So I have still a friend now, but I had a friend in college who, I think the deal is that she managed to never take a class with someone she didn't know. I don't know how she pulled this off, but she roped a lot of people into taking electives with her. She was also a journalism major. And so she was taking this like intro to photo elective course there in the journalism program. And she asked me, do you want to take this class with me? And I said, okay. I did not have any kind of background in photography other than I think I had those disposable point and shoots at some point, I never really had cameras. And, but my dad had an old one from work that he sent me, an old Minolta, I think it's an X100. I can't remember what kind it was. An old film camera. And I took the class and I don't know, I really liked it. But at that point, because I had transferred schools and degrees, I was already a senior. I actually took 5.5 years to graduate from college. So I came really close to being there as long as I would have needed to have gotten a master's, but just came away with an undergrad. But I've just really found photography kind of interesting. And they wouldn't let me into the Photo J program at that point because I was too close to graduating, but they cut me a deal and they basically let me take about 3 or 4 classes. And then they essentially told me, go work at the student paper. So that was sort of my in, was working at the Daily Texan, and I just loved it. The part about writing that I liked was I liked telling stories and I liked meeting people a lot. And I found that I had a chance to do that even more as like a photography person. So, I just kind of I went with that, and I guess I'll just kind of go into how I sort of ended up in the job, because it's all sort of flows.
Yeah.
When I graduated from college, from UT, I didn't really. So I had, done all this work to be a writer, and I had taken a whole bunch of copy editing classes, so I kind of had that skill set. But I just really liked the photo thing, but I had no internships. And I realized really fast, like I wasn't, I was competing against all these people that had internships and also were like amazing. I was horrible. I was so bad. But I applied for a job at a little town called Paris, Texas. Had an opening for the newspaper, and it was about an hour and a half northeast of Dallas. And I just applied, and I don't know, they were interested in my work. And I remember when I talked to it was a really small paper. I talked to the publisher. He's like, I went to UT too. And it really felt like that might've been a little bit of a part of it, like just kind of like the good old boy thing. But yeah, that was my first job out of college. This would have been, I graduated in the winter of 2002. So I took that job in January of 2003. And that was like my year-long internship, because I had no idea what I was doing. And that is like, that happened to me again when I went into the Marcom world. Like I totally felt like I BS'd my way into a job and suddenly had to like learn on the fly. But yeah, I ended up at the small town paper, and I shot high school sports every night, and I sometimes had to feature hunt like 2 times a day. It was a beating, but it taught me a lot of things very fast.
Yeah. Were you the only photographer on staff there?
No, there was another guy, not Bill Richardson. That's the governor of New Mexico. Bill Henderson. I can't remember his name anymore. He's a nice dude. And he basically was like, I was the night guy and he was the dayside guy, and also sort of handled like the pre-production for the paper. So he actually taught me a whole lot about toning and like, getting the pictures ready for CMYK. So that was like a weird skill set that I kind of ended up with for a while, and like doing knockouts and stuff like that. I think he had been like a pre-press guy at the Copley papers like back in the day, and then his wife got like a job down in Paris, and he ended up there, and that was his like sort of floating to retirement gig.
Interesting. I mean, and you kind of glossed over that, but I mean, the fact that you were just out of college, no internship experience, and now you're suddenly thrust into that sort of workload as a staff photographer. I mean, that's crazy, basically.
It was nuts. It was really stupid. I should have crashed and burned, but I got very lucky. That's, if I wrote a book, it would be I got very lucky, because I feel like that's like a repeating pattern in my life. But I ended up there, and I worked there for about a year and change. And the lady that I had met in college and started dating pretty seriously, who is now my wife and upstairs. We have a new baby, so she sleeps all the time. They both sleep all the time. But she's from Fort Worth, and she had moved up there after college when she graduated. So I just didn't want to do the commute from Paris to Fort Worth, and she wasn't going to move to Paris. So I, gave my notice, and I moved to Fort Worth, and I started freelancing. And that's actually initially how I started to meet. That's how I met people at the morning news, and that's how I basically kind of got my foot in the door for the job, a few years later.
Yeah. What do you think you credit that first year of learning and getting into the industry? Like, what do you think made that successful, as opposed to, like you said, potentially crashing and burning?
That's a really good question. When I really want to do something, I can do it. I'm super lazy, and I'm wildly distractible. Again, I think that's like the undiagnosed childhood ADHD or something. But when I'm into something, I'm like really into it, and I can kind of focus really well on it. And I just liked it. It was just a new experience, and I had a lot of help. So at that point, I would say, the internet had obviously been around for a while, but like the beginnings of what I think were going to become social media had become a thing. So there was like the Sport Shooter message board. I don't know if anyone's ever talked to you about that before. And then the A Photo a Day listserv. Those two things, and then a little bit later, the MPPA had a mentorship program that I used a lot too. Those three things saved my butt. and they were able to put me in contact with people that I admired or grew to admire through their work. And, it was like an indispensable way of just getting guidance, especially a photo a day. I will probably praise Melissa Little like 1,000 times during this conversation, but the connections that I made in that and the things that I've learned, I actually think that's more what helped me be successful, because it sort of gave me a place. The other photographer that was there was a super nice guy, but he wasn't there to be a mentor. He wasn't there to critique my work. And he made that pretty clear in the beginning, not in a mean way. It was pretty obvious that wasn't the role that he wanted. And so not having had any internships and not really having had a lot of formal training, I like really needed that at that moment. And so that early part of, it really was, I realize now, kind of like the beginnings of what became social media, a way to sort of interact with people and get like real-time feedback. That was a huge, huge thing for me. And it created a network of acquaintances and some people that have become really close friends that essentially helped me get jobs later. It's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's taking me back to thinking about the original APAD days. And it was kind of the, pure and driven snow version of social media right now, because it was this community of, photojournalists and editorial photographers in this really tight group that
right.
The feedback really meant something, and you weren't producing it for anyone else. Like you weren't looking for admiration. You wanted feedback.
Yeah, that was huge. And I think one of the things that really helped me with that, or being in that mindset, was coming from the music background, because I had a lot of sort of, I don't want to say training. I had a lot of experience with critique.
Mm-hmm.
And I really valued what I viewed, and still to this day view, as like strong critique. Like when I get notes back from a client on something and they want changes, sometimes if you put a lot of work into something, it sort of sucks if they don't like it. But that's also a little bit your fault for going too far in and not getting their buy-in, especially if it's not what they wanted. But that's for a later part of the conversation. But, it doesn't bother me. Like I want to know how I can make it better. And I think this is going to sound kind of weird and sad. I think that fundamentally comes from having like, I don't know if I want to say low self-esteem, but I always feel like I could do 1,000% better than I've done. I'm never happy with anything I do, other than my kids. I'm pretty happy with them. I don't know that I could do much better with them, although I credit my wife with that. But like, I'm very rarely super happy with something. And I've actually had to learn the hard way to walk away from stuff and not nitpick it, because I can just tear my own stuff apart. And that really has helped me over the years, like not just sort of solicit critique, but like want it. So that sounds almost masochistic, which I think is bizarre.
Well, it's bizarre, but it rings true for me. I think to some degree you have to have a healthy level of dissatisfaction with your work.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think if we care so much about the work that we do, about the stories we're telling, that it's kind of impossible for photojournalists and people in the visual storytelling world to not really commit themselves to it and commit themselves to getting better.
I agree.
Yeah, exactly. So getting back to, we're kind of transitioning back into your time at Dallas. So you started freelancing with Dallas Morning News, and that transition and moved into a full-time position. Tell me a little bit about how, some of those early freelancing and building that network in the new city.
Yeah. So I had a mutual friend, again, through that sportshooter.com network, who knew someone that was a high-level editor in the photo department there. So Sam Morris is his name, and then the editor was, say, Jody Steck. Sam, I'm getting to a point now where I can start remembering names. If I go too far back, I can't remember names, but like my sweet spot's like 12 or 13 years. So he just knew Jody from back in the day. So when I moved to Fort Worth, he said, "Hey, I'm going to get you like some sit-down time with Jody." So I took my little rinky-dink portfolio. Backtracking a little bit, one of the things that helped me a little bit get my foot in the door freelance wise was, I don't think it's as much of a deal back then now, but back in the day, AP was always wanting you to submit photos to them. And they actually paid you $10 a photo that they picked up. So it became like extra because the job in Paris paid nothing. Even with overtime, I was like broke all the time. But the extra $10, if I got 10 photos on the wire in a month, I mean, that's an extra $100. It's not bad. So I put a lot of content out there, and I guess the morning news folks saw it, and they ran some as sort of wild art every once in a while. And then I covered a really bad breaking news thing in town that had a Dallas connection. So that I ended up like, I think my photo might have been, I don't know if it was 1A or the cover of Sports, because it had a sports hook to it. But some of the, and that happened like a little bit before I left the paper. So my name and that work was kind of fresh in their mind when I showed up and asked if I could freelance. And, they were like, we don't really have a lot of work in Fort Worth right now, but they liked me, I guess, and they liked my work. So they tossed me some gigs now and then. And I also was doing assisting for a guy that used to actually be a morning news photographer. And that taught me a lot about lighting, because I knew, and again, I totally lied. He had like thrown his back out, and he was like, I just need someone to like carry a backpack. He's like, you know about lighting, right? And I was like, yeah, I know a lot about lighting. I didn't know anything about lighting, but I learned a lot. So I did that. I didn't freelance at the morning news for very long. I freelanced there for a summer, but at that point, so this would have been 2004, the freelancers actually went into the morning news a lot for like edits and stuff. It's weird to think about that now, but like I went to the morning news building like a couple of times a week for in-person edits, and I got to know a lot of the photo editors there, and even some of the photographers. And I took a job at the newspaper in Columbia, Missouri, so where University of Missouri is. And again, it was through people I knew through Sports Shooter and a Photo a Day. And I worked there for 3.5 years, and that's where I got into documentary storytelling. Because I mean, you can't not be in Columbia and just get sucked into that world. And I did Missouri Photo Workshop and the whole 9 yards. And the Tribune is what the name of the paper is called, was really cool back then, because they actually had 2 special sections that ran every Sunday that had room for photo stories. And so you had to generate like that level of photography, like a lot. And we had a photo column, so we were having to go out like once a month and try to find stuff for that. And then on top of it, it was a pretty high workload paper. But it really, if the Paris, Texas News was my internship, the Columbia Tribune was my first job. That's kind of how I've always thought about it. Or like a second deeper internship maybe. And when I came out of there, my portfolio was a lot stronger. I had a lot, from covering college basketball. They actually used to follow the football and the men's basketball team on the road, which was totally brutal. But we actually followed the Mizzou men's basketball team like on the road a lot. So that gave me like a lot of experience sort of living that life. My wife had started law school in Columbia, and then she transferred to UT Austin. And so it was the same thing. She followed me, I follow her. That's kind of the pattern that we've had our lives. I was going to be just moving back to Austin. So I reached out to those old connections that I used to freelance for. And I said, hey, I'm leaving my job in Missouri. I'm probably going to live in Austin. They had a staff photographer in Austin at the time, a guy named Eric Schlegel. So I knew that Eric was down there, and I knew they had other freelancers, but essentially it was just sort of throwing my hat in the ring. Like, if you have work down there, that would be great. And I talked to the statesman and tried to sort of give a heads up to other people, that I might be looking for a job if possible. And I got a call from a guy named Andy Scott, who's now at USA Today, like a couple of days later. I think he was the one I reached out to. And he called me and he said, hey, we have a couple of openings that are coming up here, and I'd love for you to apply for them, which completely floored me. Like, it wasn't even, I couldn't even process it right. I remember thinking when he told that to me, I was like, maybe he's calling the wrong person. This is so embarrassing. I'm gonna have to tell him that he's got like a different Gerry, the one that sucks. But yeah, and it was weird too, because that the position got frozen and then another one opened up. It took a while, but yeah, I ended up getting a job there. And I think that what the person that hired me told me, my boss Leslie told me, was it's funny because when I left Columbia and I saw the morning news, and of course at that point in my career I knew exactly who was at the morning news, and I was very familiar with their work, and they were really like on the cutting edge of video, and they had all this amazing project work, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do the project stuff. But I remember Leslie telling me, I'm not hiring you for projects. She's like, I'm up to my ears in project photographers. I don't have people that can shoot everything. And that's basically what got me my gig. And I had that skill set because I had basically come up like the hard way, big air quotes when I say the hard way. But you know what I mean? Like I had only ever been at tiny papers where I had to do everything. Like,
you had to be a generalist. Yeah.
So that's really what got me the gig, I think. And yeah, I got there in the summer of 07, and it was like I was beyond humbled by the whole process. Like I never in a million years thought that I was going to end up at a paper like that. And everyone there was so awesome, and the photo editing staff there was so good. Like my photography got 1,000 times better when I got there because of the photo editors. I have no doubt about that in my mind. And my coworkers that were, light years ahead of me that were willing to sort of work with me. So
yeah.
I don't know if that answers the question about how I went from like small town Paris to there, but I think being a generalist was a big part of it.
Yeah, it's kind of it's so often viewed as a negative, I think, but understanding that having that breadth of experience, that being able to be thrown into any situation and come back with quality work, that's kind of the goal for a lot of kind of newspaper settings, and actually I think applicable outside of newspaper a lot too. Right.
It's funny, that was my like, after a couple of years, that became my niche at the paper and this was when there was like, a lot of photographers, and like, you maybe shot 1 or 2 assignments a day. I was on the kind of de facto sports team. I shot a lot of sports, but I also was someone that they could give assignments to that felt hopeless, because I would go just come up with something. And I don't mean that as a brag, because it's not, I don't think it's something to brag about, but I actually really enjoyed the challenge. Like I liked being able to sort of like, figure out a way to get some kind of visual out of something. And it felt like, at the time, it also felt like job security, which became more and more important the longer I spent there. So
yeah, so that's interesting that you mentioned that kind of became your sort of calling card as it was at the paper, when originally you kind of thought you wanted to go more down the documentary project like path. What kind of did you see as your career goals at that time?
I mean, I'd never wanted to be like the foreign, like I'm going to use, people that were at the paper at the time. Like I didn't want to be like the David Leeson or the Cheryl Mai. I love their work and they were amazing people to work with, but I didn't want to like go to Afghanistan and win Pulitzers and stuff. And that's not to sort of, deconstruct their careers to those simple things. So they did a lot of stuff, but the people like Mel Burford, Lara Solt, who I'm still friends with, Sonia Hebert, who actually started at the same time I did, getting to see this sort of like immersive community work they were doing. That's exactly what I wanted. And I actually started to get, after a while, I mean, I'll be honest about it. Like I remember starting to get kind of resentful that I wasn't like on the team of people that could be considered. Do you know what I mean? Because I always sort of had this attitude, like, if they just give me a chance, like these projects come to them, like, there's not to sort of say that I knew how much work that they were putting into their stuff, how much prep work went into it, just how much, sweat equity you put into those kinds of projects. But they still came to them as like fully formed projects with like an amazing investigative writer and like the full support, that's all they would work on for like a year. Like I craved that opportunity so much, but it wasn't my role. And, I just kind of, no matter how long I was there until the day that I left, I felt like I was in some sort of weird dream and that I shouldn't be there. So I never totally got an attitude like, I've been here 10 years, damn it, you let me work up, and I did get towards the end, as people started leaving, they did start to give me some chances to flex a little bit more and do some of that kind of work. That was the guilt trip that was laid on me as I tried to leave, was, oh, you're just getting started with this. Like, you're about to hit your peak. Like, if you stay here, you're going to get to do all these great things. And, at that point I was ready to go. So it didn't really work, but I did find that really funny that I spent 10 years there, desperately trying to do stories. And then all I had to do was basically just quit, and they'd offer me a bunch. It wasn't that simple.
Sure.
I don't want to be jerky about the people that were there, because they were super cool about everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, without getting too kind of psychiatrist in the chair there, do you think that's something you regret a little bit about kind of choosing the path of the generalist as opposed to the project specialist?
I don't know. I don't know that I regret it. I don't think that I wouldn't have gotten that job if I was a project person, and the truth is most of the freelance assignments that I got were all generalist stuff. You know what I mean? Like, cover this breaking news, go take a portrait of this. There's a new classroom opening up. It's all digital. Like, go do that. Like, that's actually the stuff that paid the bills. And really is what got my foot in the door. And not just that I could do it, but that I wanted to do it, that I didn't have, because let's face it, people that by the time they got to a paper like the morning news, they were big time. They don't want to go do that community stuff. That's what the freelancers were for. But the dynamics were changed. Even by the time I showed up in 07, I heard that so much from the old timers. Oh man, you should have been here 10 years ago. It was amazing, and it was amazing to me. I was just what are you talking about? This place is a dream, But the dynamics were started to go the direction that I think they've taken, where they were freelancing less. People were being expected to do more. And I was kind of coming from such a small little place, I was ready made for that moment, to sort of just jump in and be like, I'll do that. Sure. I'm sure the older folks probably thought I was just ridiculous for not seeing what a travesty it was.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting that you kind of talk about, you kind of self-selected into the generalist role based on kind of the assignments you take, because it's kind of, in a certain way, I know how you feel, because as a freelancer myself, it's you're called upon to shoot a very specific set of kind of projects. There's a certain style, a certain thing that you get called on to do, and because your portfolio slowly gets filled up with more and more and more of that, you're kind of by default kind of pushed into that path, unless you make a real conscious decision otherwise to go work on your own personal projects or stories and all of that.
I think that's fair. I think you're that's a good way to look at it. And I don't want to make it seem like I didn't like doing the random stuff. I loved it. It was really nice to kind of just float around and do weird stuff and go to weird places and meet, people. And I don't know, I just kind of, it was very random. And I think it suited my kind of hyperactive brain really well. And, had I been given those opportunities, would I have really done a good job with them? I don't know. It's easy to think that you would be super amazing in a situation when you're seeing it from the outside. If I'm going to be honest about it, especially where I was at, sort of, I hit kind of personally and emotionally a kind of a rough period in Dallas for a while, and I don't know that I would have been able to actually do it. I would have sort of the acumen and the faculties to really pursue the work that I thought I could do. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. Because we're looking back on those moments in our career with the wealth of knowledge that we now have,
right?
and assume that our skills kind of caught up. Is there a kind of really impactful story or project or a particular assignment that really stands out from your time in Dallas?
They were really cool about letting me do weird stuff.
Hmm.
Like, I had seen a project that a guy named Wes Pope did called Pop 66. And he did some other kind of cool pinhole stuff, but he did this whole project where he shot along Route 66 with pinhole cameras that he made out of soda cans. And I was like, I want to do that. And so I basically just pitched this idea to the paper. I always tried to make sure I had a hook. So I was like, hey, for Earth Day, I want to like find trash and make cameras out of the trash and then take pictures where I found the trash of the environment that the trash was in. That part of the project got a little nebulous. Like, that was harder to do. But, this was like, I don't know, 08, 09. And there were still like, 20 something photographers, and they still had a pretty good freelance budget. They were like, yeah, sure. That's fine. That's kind of weird.
Wow.
But whatever. Yeah, no, it was super cool. They let me do that one. They let me do some fun stuff on film with like double exposures. When I started to do more video, they let me do some kind of fun stuff with like cinemagraphs. It's so I was just talking to someone about this like a year ago. As I remember it really viscerally, like so many apps have come, like there's now all these apps that'll let you do double exposures. Like I feel like such an old fart. I'm like, I remember doing that in a Hasselblad and it was a pain in the ass. Like, and yeah, the cinemagraphs was like so hard. And now there's like a bunch of apps that do it beautifully. But it's stuff like that. They always let me try to do weird, funky stuff, which I always appreciated, and not just that, but like found a home for it. Like, one of my photo editors there, Guy Reynolds, who's a really close friend of mine and passed away. Gosh, it's been a couple of years now. He was like super into weird stuff too. And he shot Holgas and just all kinds of fun stuff. So he and I were like, mind melded all the time over this stuff, but he always found like a cool home for stuff in the paper. And another editor of mine there, Michael Hamptel, always found a neat home for stuff. So it was really, that had a big impact on me, because it's nice to have support when you want to do something like that. I never really was a real big personal projects guy,
mm-hmm.
but being able to sort of do personal project type things and then have the support of the paper was so cool. And, I don't know if they're still able to do that, but it was such a neat thing. And then the last thing that I did before I left, they actually did let me spend several months with, like a homeless family transitioning out of, like a group home. And that was a really cool project. That was, I won't say fun to work on, but it was a really good experience. And the stuff that I ended up producing with that video wise and in my portfolio was what the people that hired me at the Yukon Foundation really liked a lot. So it did kind of end up helping me get that job.
Yeah. So we'll get into kind of the transitioning,
mm-hmm.
both geographically and, and sort of job wise, but let's dig in a little bit on that project specifically. Like, what kind of give us the nuts and bolts of the story and what aspects you brought to it?
I'm totally gonna forget the wife's name now, which makes me feel like a horrible person. It was Kenneth, and this is why I admired my coworkers. Like, I guarantee you that someone like Mel Burford or Lara like probably remembers every person they ever did a story on ever. Basically, I wanted to do something in depth like that, and I sort of had a real interest in trying to cover poverty in Dallas. At the time, there was like a real big swell at the morning news to like do, some sort of really large comprehensive project on poverty in Southern Dallas and how people had gotten kind of trapped there. And there was another writer there, Steve Thompson, that kind of was basically heading the same direction I was in the kind of story that he wanted to tell. Less sprawling, more individualized, right? Like, rather than tell a big story broadly, can we tell this big story through the lens of, it's a common thing, right? It's a good way to tell a story, is to sort of break it down and make it easier to focus. So my editors and his editors kind of shoved us together and said, you guys figure something out. And he had already started the groundwork on doing something with this particular homeless shelter called Dallas Life. And he found this family that had been living in a van for a while. They'd been at the shelter for a while. They'd come in real hard and they'd become like model people there. You know, they had done all the things they were supposed to do, but they were having a really hard time getting out. And what Steve wanted to show, and what he did a really great job in his writing, the project was called The Long Way Home, but is how difficult that process is, like just like from a bureaucratic sense. You know, you hear people so flippantly say stuff like, oh yeah, they just get Section 8 housing. Like, it's really hard to qualify for that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard to get it. And so we actually followed them for that whole process, and we followed them. You know, they had a lot of setbacks, and they did eventually get their own apartment through a group. I don't think it was Section 8. It was through some other sort of like a nonprofit. And it was just a really neat journey. I felt really grateful that they were willing to be so open with us and let us be there like all the time. We were over at their place like a lot. Yeah, it was that was probably the most in-depth thing I had done since I had been in Missouri, but none of the stuff I had done in Missouri where I spent that amount of time were that deep. They were more superficial, you know? And so this was well, that's not true. I did something with like a family that built water towers, where I did actually spend a lot of time with them. 'Cause it's really just like, that's what I learned about that process, is that it's really more about just sort of being present and not, like, I felt like the time that I spent not taking pictures was way more important than the time that I spent taking pictures. And for me, it's different for everybody, but I found pretty quickly, even before spending time with them, I had kind of learned over the years that I didn't work very well with the fly on the wall approach. I mean, sometimes you have to do that, but that I actually found that I got a lot farther by just being me and being very sort of being present and sort of engaged, you know, that I became less like some random person that was sort of hanging out there with a camera, and more just somebody that they got to know. And, you know, they didn't mind having around, you know, in those intimate moments.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of there's the two halves of documentary work is you have to drive it forward by being there, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. But you also have to let the story tell itself sometimes, and knowing when to be that active participant and when to be that more sort of passive fly on the wall.
I never did well with the fly on the wall thing. It was terrible. There were probably a lot of times that I should have probably not been as engaged as I was. I don't know if maybe that hurt the story in the long run, but I don't know. That's just kind of how I am. I just like to get to know people. I think that always meant more to me than the pictures, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And this dovetails really nicely into your transition from the newspaper world into the marketing and communications world.
Yeah.
So, because that's
side.
No, it's not the dark side, I don't think.
I don't actually feel that way. Yeah. Janice, I had to look it up because this is going to make me completely insane. Janice and Kenneth.
Mm-hmm. So you both moved geographically from Texas to Connecticut, right, as well as kind of a job transition. Like what was going through your head as you moved from the newspaper world?
Well, I really wanted to leave the paper. I didn't want to be there anymore.
Yeah.
And I had started looking pretty seriously for job, and I didn't. There were like two other papers that I would have been willing to go to, and they're not what you think they are. Not New York Times, not Washington Post. And there are other regionals, and both of those regionals actually did have openings around the same time that I was thinking about looking. And I applied. I don't even know if I was a real finalist for either of them, because I never ended up on the phone. So I wouldn't say that I was a finalist for either. But, you know, I had really good conversations with them, but it just didn't work out. They hired other people. That's great. I think it just decided that I just didn't. I had this set of skills. It feels like that Liam Neeson movie. But I have these skills, right? I was pretty good at video. I could photo edit. I could do photography. I could write, I guess. And I just started to think, like, what the hell am I going to do now? Because I just didn't want to be at the paper anymore. And so I started looking, you know, I talked to a couple of people I knew, and they said, well, you know, universities are always looking for people. So they showed me some places online to look for jobs. And I just started applying for jobs like all over the country. I talked to my wife about it. So my wife is an attorney for the IRS. No, she will not. She will not work on your taxes, and she doesn't care about your taxes. I always get asked that. People are like, "Oh, that's not." She works with nonprofits, so unless you run a nonprofit and you're breaking the law, you don't have to worry about anything. But the deal with her was it just had to be wherever I looked for a gig had to be close to essentially like an IRS field office, and they're everywhere. So any major metro would have one. So I started applying for different jobs, and I saw this one come up for this job at the Yukon Foundation, which I'd never heard of. I'd never even thought of Connecticut before. I don't even know that it crossed my mind. And I remember when I looked at the job ad, I noticed that they used the word storyteller a couple of times in the job ad. And I was like, well, that's cool. That's me. I could do this. And so I applied. I wrote a cover letter. And they were, as I learned later, they were very glacial about hiring. But, like months later, I totally forgot I'd even applied for this gig, but I got a call from the HR manager, and then just, I think at that point, like I was starting to think that I was just going to be at the morning news until I got laid off, or that I wasn't going to find something else and I was just going to get stuck there. Because that was my big fear, was that, I was in my late 30s at the time, and I was like, if I don't pivot now, I'm going to be 50 something. No job is going to be available to me because no one's going to want to bring in a 50-something-year-old, and I'm going to be basically playing that weird game that a lot of my old friends are playing, which is like, will I make it to retirement? It's the worst game. The house always wins. And so they called me and they flew me out there, which was crazy. I'd never been to Connecticut. It was weird. Like I had to lie about, like a last minute, like I got to take a trip to see my mom. But I would stupidly like put a couple of things on my Instagram stories, and a couple of my coworkers were like, that didn't look like Laredo. And they, it was the same thing. I suffer from major imposter syndrome, and I never feel like I'm supposed to have what I get. And so I got offered the job, and I remember thinking, like, you people are nuts. I don't know anything about any of this stuff. But they brought me up, and I came out here first. I was by myself for about 6 months. I just hit the ground running. I asked them to get me Adobe Premiere and Adobe After Effects. I had never opened either program until my first day at work. I just thank God for kids on YouTube. I learned so much in like my first month and a half. The thing that saved me there was that they're a much slower shop than like a newspaper was. And so the projects were a lot more, I had to learn a whole new way of thinking. Working on long-term projects at the paper in Dallas and in Columbia kind of helped me a little bit with this, especially when you have to balance like daily assignments on top of projects. But essentially the way the workload was at the foundation was, you would seem not busy because you'd have like some projects that rolled in that weren't due for months. But the problem would be if you didn't do a little bit of work on them as you went along, suddenly you had like 4 large things that were due at once. See, it was like a baptism in fire for me with time management. I was never particularly that good with that until I started this job. And I learned a lot of really hard lessons very fast on managing my time and managing projects and managing expectations, saying no sometimes when you have to say no. So. Mm-hmm.
What was it like kind of going through that process of realizing that dream job of the newspaper staff position was kind of the nightmare?
Oh, it broke my heart. I was so sad. I was really bummed out for a long time when I started to really realize that. But, what's more important, like a dream job or knowing that, I can have a steady gig and support my family, support my wife. I'm fortunate that she has a good job and it's has pretty good job security. But weird stuff happens. What if I remember thinking like, well, what if she lost her job and then we were just on my like little rinky-dink morning news salary? Like, I don't know. I just started to really I got sober in 2012, and it was around 2012 that the way I started to approach work and my life really fundamentally changed in a very real way. And I think that was the beginning of me realizing that and there was like a huge round of layoffs. Well, '08 was brutal because of, the recession and everything. So but there was like a cascading series of layoffs, and there was like a really bad one, I think in like 11 or 12 there. And I just started to kind of realize, like, you go through your first couple of layoffs and you're like, well, I'm young and I'm pretty good. Like I'm pretty good at my job. Like, there's other people on staff here that are a little older than me, and maybe they're a little more specialized. Like there's fat to try. I hate to say that because that sounds so horrible to the people that do get laid off and all those dreams that are crushed. But you start to sort of play this mental game with yourself where you think, well, there's other people ahead of me that would probably get laid off before I do. And at some point, like a few years later, that's you. You can't rationalize that anymore. And so I just didn't want to be like that anymore. And yeah, it totally broke my heart. But it's okay. I have zero regrets that I left that business. So, but I don't have zero regrets that I was in it. It was a beautiful experience, and I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Yeah, that's a perfect sentiment to kind of respecting what it gave you, as well as understanding that it wasn't right for you for the future.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I guess on that, I think we have in this audience of the podcast, it's varied, I think, but it definitely leans more into the, editorial photographer, photojournalist crowd, but general photographers as well. And I guess what would you think is something that photojournalists can learn from the marketing and communications world, and maybe vice versa?
Well, here's a really important lesson that I've learned on the outside, both at the foundation, and it's even more so apparent to me now at a much larger organization like Stanley Black & Decker. I don't think that people in newspapers realize the level of autonomy they have with the creative process, particularly photographers and videographers. Because unless things have really changed fundamentally since I was in the business, like the way it would work is someone wants a picture of something, or there's an assignment, and they say, all right, photographer, go get me some pictures of this. But essentially, you are now in complete creative control of that situation, and you go make the pictures that you want, and you come back, and maybe there's an editor that kind of goes through them, whatever, and you tell them, like, essentially the entire process is like in your court, right? You're like, I saw the assignment this way, and all right, it's documentary photography, so I'm not trying to say it like creative, in the pejorative sense, like you did something wrong. No, not at all. But, you go into these situations and you essentially make a series of creative decisions about how you're going to document what's in front of you, and those get turned in, and maybe people along the way, there's little sort of, someone else might pick the picture, like a night editor or something, but essentially you've been in full control of that situation for the most part. That is really not what marketing is like. And there are a lot of people that you need to get buy-in from, and you need to get on your side, and you need to basically get them to sign off on ideas. It's a lot like, I remember we moved here when we bought this house, and it was the first time we ever had like major contracting work done. And so we work at the contract, and we're cool. Like we didn't have like super crazy ideas, but we probably had a couple that weren't like realistic. And I remember he would sort of be like, okay, well, like, yeah, I see what you want to do here, but it won't quite work that way. Like, let me sort of tell you how I think it would work. And then he kind of would bend us to his expertise. And that's really what I spend most of my time doing. Sometimes, people want you to do something, they want you to be fully in, and you do it the way you want to do it. But like, that's rare. And I think that you learn how to basically take someone else's idea or their vision and execute it with your skill set. And I actually really like that now. Like it's actually maybe again, it's that kind of ADHD thing where it's different than what I used to do, but it actually feels, I was really worried when I left journalism, because one of the things that I aside from just liking to meet new people and experience new things, like I really just liked feeling like I was doing something positive with myself. I never really yes, it helps people, and you can change lives, but like, I don't know. I shot building mugs and went to Cowboys games and feature hunted and went to I don't know, like I don't know how much of that actually changed any one individual's life, but I was doing something positive with myself, um, so I was worried that I wasn't going to have that when I left, and that I was just going to be helping people ask for money or make money. You know what I mean? And like I found a nice little comfort in that, I can sort of, rather than worrying about the bigger picture, I can kind of see it more like, well, I have these colleagues or these internal or external clients, and they really want to do this thing, but they don't know how to get there. But I know how to get them there, so I can help them. To kind of rationalize it a little bit, it's not the same thing as journalism. You're not really, but what I at the foundation, the nice thing is that the goal was to raise money for scholarships for kids that needed it, or for programs at university that needed it. Now I'm at a real company, but the nice thing is that it's a company that really does, is very public about wanting to do the right thing and be a good company. And so because I work on the corporate marketing side, like that's the story that I get to help tell. I get to help tell, the things that we're doing to have a positive impact in our local communities, because it's a huge company. I mean, it's all over the world, right? And things that we're doing to try to be more sustainable, things that we're doing towards ethnic and gender, equality and parity. That's really the main reason why I was attracted to this job. Was I still just wanted to do something where I was working for somebody and I felt good about what I was doing. That's really important to me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that sort of core impact.
I don't know if that answered the question at all, but I think it's just keeping an open mind.
Yeah.
I still get to do, maybe it's coming from the music background and more of the arts background, and not being, I don't know. I never really felt like that serious of a journalist. I didn't have that dogged, leather on the pavement, cigar chomping, like I got to find the story, man. Like that was never me. And I always felt like a bit of a fraud in journalism, because I just liked doing fun stuff, and I liked getting to take pictures and, just be a little creative. And so now where I'm at, I get to be a lot creative, and I still get to tell stories in a way, and they're just different. So I think it's just keeping an open mind and recognizing that, yes, there's a lot of people that, everyone's got a cell phone now, and now there's like Zoom recordings out the butt. Like everyone can basically produce content, but there are still companies out there that want someone that can do it well and can do it with confidence. I think that's something that journalists can bring that I've seen in other job candidates, is there's a level of confidence. It's like, yeah, I can do anything. Like I can do that story. Like, I'll work on that. Do you know what I mean? Not hesitating and just jumping right in. Like that's, for maybe the folks that might be listening to this that are coming from more of an editorial thing, like, your editor's not going to want you to call them every 2 minutes asking for advice. You're just going to do it, and you're going to turn it in on deadline, and then you're going to go to the next assignment. Like there's a real level of I guess confidence is the word I keep coming back to, that I think is a really valuable skill in a lot of industries. Like to be the kind of person that your boss knows, I have given Gerry the pieces of the puzzle that he needs to start working on, and I am not going to worry about it. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I don't know if I learned that completely from journalism, but that is the role that I have now. I'm sure one of these days it's all going to come crashing and burning, and I'm going to super screw it up, and they're going to be like, aha, we knew you were going to mess us up one day. But so many journalists have the ability to just get it done. And I don't think that they realize just how valuable that is in like a ton of industries.
It's interesting hearing the sort of marketing. Marketing used to be sort of a dirty word, I think, to a lot of photographers and journalists, and it's not anymore. But do you think there really can be such thing as sort of authentic marketing?
Yes.
Yeah. Tell me more.
Yeah. I had a really good, so when I took the job at the foundation, I reached out to a few people that I knew had also left newspapers. And it's funny because I've since had a bunch of conversations with people that were thinking about leaving papers, and some of them did end up leaving. It's nice to be able to pay that back. One of the people I talked to was a guy named Joshua Trujillo, who I've never even met, but I've had like several conversations with him now. And he's at Starbucks. And he and I had a couple of conversations about this. And he was at that time really seeing that corporations were going to want people like journalists, not just because of their technical abilities, but because they can see a story, they can figure it out. Do you know what I mean? That they were going to want to tell those more authentic stories, like what you said. And I think it's true. I think you're seeing a lot more of it. So like what we do here at Stanley, are they authentic stories? I think there's a way to be authentic in how you tell a story and the emotions that you convey, and still serve the needs of the company, provided that the needs of the company aren't like super crazy. Like I feel like I'm gonna get a call from Pizza Hut. Can Pizza Hut tell a super authentic story? I don't know. Maybe they can. Maybe there's someone that like their life was changed by that. But like I've seen Starbucks do that, and I've seen Patagonia do that, and the folks at Amazon Stories are doing that. Like they're finding ways to tell stories that show that companies can do things other than just make money and make the shareholders happy. And I think that that's the kind of stories that we can tell on the corporate side. Are they authentic? I mean, I think so. I certainly approach them in a really authentic, or try to be an authentic way. I'm in the middle of a couple right now that will involve us, working with employees, and wanting like a genuine story. Like that was my goal when I got here. And that's luckily the same thing that a lot of people have, like getting away from the very sort of heavy corporate voiceover, dramatic music, and just like telling stories, because there's so many. And again, Josh has done a wonderful job of that at Starbucks. They're doing a really good job at Amazon. I saw one, like CVS had one the other day that I saw on the internet that was really nice. It was like a nice story about, like, I can't remember the gist of it, but like it was a genuine story. I thought it was well done. Yeah, in the end of the day, is the whole thing to basically just, help CVS sell more Zoloft or something? Like, yeah, I don't know. But here's the thing, like, how many decisions are being made by newspapers now that are simply keeping the lights on, which for most newspapers means making the shareholders happy? It's really not any different. It might have been different back in the day. And I have so many friends that are still in the business, and I worry that if they heard this, I would piss them off. Like, that is not to take away from the amazing role that journalism has in any functioning society, from the photographers to the paginators, if they're still putting out a paper, to the, all the people. It is a giant pirate ship that is a super important part of the ocean. I shouldn't say pirate system because that's bad. It is a really important thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the forces that run those places, with the exception of maybe like a few papers now, they don't really care about that. They want to make money. You can find that equilibrium in journalism. You can find that equilibrium on the outside too. So if you are listening to this and you're worried about going to the dark side, it's not that dark.
All right, Gerry. Well, that's a perfect way to kind of wrap up today's conversation. We'll just send people off with a little bit of lightning round questions before the end.
Okay.
All right. What's the one thing in your bag that you'd never leave home without?
My cell phone. That's a stupid answer. It's weird because I have a video bag and a photo bag. For the video bag is a Cretog. I don't know. I never say that right. One of those, like the Greytog Macbeth cards.
Oh.
Those are so important to me now.
Okay.
If you're shooting in log and you want to you don't want to spend all day like making yourself crazy with like matching colors, that's a really, if I accidentally don't have it in my bag, I feel super upset. I'm like running around trying to find like whites and other colors that I know are true colors.
Oh, that's a perfect answer. What's the most important thing you've said no to in your career?
The promise of getting to do the kind of work I really wanted to do, to stay somewhere that I didn't want to be.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you do outside of photography that recharges you?
So we talked about it. I mean, I guess I do music. I don't know. I'm a terrible musician. I read a lot of fiction. I'm like reading The Stand right now. I don't know. As soon as the pandemic hit, I started reading nothing but like apocalyptic literature. It made my wife nuts. She's like, "Why are you doing this to yourself?" But yeah, as someone that I always like to write, and I really appreciate, good writing, good poetry. I just like to read stuff. I don't know. I really like art. I don't know. Those are all generic answers.
Oh, that's good. They're good. So what advice might you give to a student graduating from university today about a career in photography?
Don't let people tell you can't do it. There's always going to be a way to find some sort of job that's kind of like what you want to do. If you keep an open mind, it'll be there. But I don't know. I feel like so many, like what I bet you've gotten some answers. People are like, "Don't do it." Like, ah, ha, ha, ha. Like, I don't know. I get kind of bummed out by that now. I even did that for a while, but I don't want to deter kids from chasing that dream. Like they could be the next, I don't know. They could be the next, I'm not going to say a name because that'd be weird. It could be the next Damon Winner or Mona Reader or someone, like why discourage someone they haven't even tried? Just try, but try not to go into too much debt.
Amen. And last but certainly not least, where can people find some of your work online or connect with you?
So yeah, I have Instagram. I don't think I sent you the Vimeo link, but I'll try to remember to do that. I've been pretty bad about putting stuff up on Vimeo. I have my website. It's not super current anymore. Yeah, I don't know. I put stuff on Twitter sometimes. I'm all over the place, kind of just everywhere.
All right. Well, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Gerry, for coming on the Photo Forward podcast.
Oh my God. Thank you for having me. This has been really nice. And I'm so grateful you wanted to talk to me. That's really nice.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
All right. You too.
Thanks everyone for listening to today's amazing episode with Gerry McCarthy. That's at GJ McCarthy on Instagram. Should definitely go check him out and give him a follow. As we mentioned in the intro to today's episode, if you've got a question or anything you want to ask on the show that I can respond to for Q&A, I've set up a page at photoforward.media/connect. Or feel free to send an email or voice message to connect@photoforward.media, and we'll tackle those AMAs in some upcoming episodes of the show. Enjoying listening to the Photo Forward podcast? Want to hear more thought-provoking, engaging discussions about photography, creativity, or freelance business? Well, this is where you come in. We want to get the word out as wide as possible about Photo Forward and reach as many listeners as possible. And the best way to do that is through reviews and recommendations on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you consume your podcasts. If you want to support more engaging and intimate conversations with photographers, cinematographers, and storytellers the world over, head on over to the Photo Forward page and drop a review to let me know how you all are enjoying the show, or even just a rating. It means a ton to growing the show, and I personally read through each and every review to make the show the best damn visual storytelling podcast out there. Thanks for listening, everyone, and as always, keep seeing, keep thinking, and keep putting your best photo forward. Catch you all in the next one.